All right, folks, this is Nathan Chu again, coming to you from the Philippines, and I'm here on another live discussion or chat with a psychologist somewhere in Louisiana.
Mhm.
I think that's where New Orleans is, right?
It
Or is that
is.
right?
It
All
is.
right.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. Or New Orleans is more popular than Louisiana.
That's totally fair. In fact, I have my drink here is from New Orleans Mardi Gras last year. So it's not the
Oh.
same beverage, it's just an orange juice. But yeah, New Orleans is quite close to my heart and about 2 hours away from where I live in Lafayette.
Oh, wow. I heard the music is terrific there.
Yeah, it's
Anyway,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, this is another episode of my series called Shrinks Over Drinks. And I'm such a creative guy, Emily. You should be proud of me. Uh, I will call it another two shrinks over drinks.
There we go.
It's always unique.
I like it. I like it. Why mess with
So
something that's working?
let's drink to that. Dr. Emily
Cheers.
Sandoz. All right. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yep. Yep. I say sand like sand on the beach and Oz like the Wizard of Oz. So
You
sand
know,
Oz.
it sounds very Filipino.
Does it?
Yeah, it's Spanish, I think. I don't know.
It's actually Swiss.
Oh,
Yeah, it's Swiss. It was an Ang or a, I don't know, Swissification of Sandoz. So it started
ah,
as French, and then French-speaking Swiss people, or I guess people with French descent or ancestors who moved to Switzerland transformed it to Sandoz from Sandoz without sleep.
oh,
So
I
at
see.
least that's the story I've heard. So who knows? But that's the story I've heard.
Well, the Philippines, we have a Spanish background, so anything
Interesting.
that has a similar sound or name, here we do use the word sando.
Mhm.
It refers to like a tank top, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's rooted in Spanish. Maybe it's originally Malay. So I'm not sure, but anyway. So let's
Anyway,
get right down to business because people are interested in eavesdropping over two
nice.
shrinks.
I
All
like
right.
it.
So that's more fun. Okay. So
Indeed.
Dr. Sandoz, can you tell me more about yourself?
Yeah.
Uh, and how did you end up in psychology?
Yeah, sure. Wow. So currently I am the graduate coordinator of a master's program in general psychology, research-based program here at UL Lafayette, so University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I've been here for, this will be my 14th year, so 13 years in that role, although, of course, took some time to get up to the professor rank.
Mhm.
And I have a lab there, the Louisiana Contextual Science Research Group. We do a lot of empirical research, we do a lot of concept building. And then I also have a private practice. So I've been working as a licensed psychologist for about 12 years. Um, for me, I guess I talked for a long time about being a counselor, a therapist. That was sort of the part of psychology that felt visible to me, as a young
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
Um, I actually did a lot of theater. So
Mm.
I did a little bit of stage theater, but I did a lot of competitive drama, which is like, I don't know if people know what this is. So it's speech and debate. And on the weekends, high school students and middle school students sort of come together and you prepare a 10-minute about selection. And so I would come and I would perform these plays or monologues from plays or prose or
Mm.
poetry. And that was really my favorite part of acting, or my favorite kind of form of acting, was competitive speech and debate. And for me, I think they come from kind of a similar a similar fascination in terms of the interest piece and a similar motivation in terms of the impact piece, and that I really wanted to understand the complexities of human experience. I felt drawn to the kinds of experiences that impact people for long periods of time, and how they come to grow from those. For me, even, acting on a stage or acting in these kind of classrooms on the weekends, these empty schools on the weekends, it was really inspiring to sort of give people an opportunity to pause and experience something significant. I felt like by conveying this poem or this scene from a play or something, we got the opportunity to help people to get in touch with feelings that maybe they weren't able to get in touch with on a normal day out at the grocery store or pumping gas or at their place of work, but they could come into this room and sort of observe this little piece and get a taste of their own experience. And it's quite similar to how I think about clinical work. I think a lot of us move around the world without a lot of time or space to kind of be with our experiences, to open up to those experiences and to respond to them in a real intentional way. So I went from doing that, I think, expecting to do that kind of in the entertainment industry, to doing it in a more scholarly and clinical way. Yeah.
All right. Oh, wow. We shared the same interest when I was younger too.
Really?
Yeah, but I was too old when I got into it. So I said, nah, this is not, I can't do this anymore at my age. I was in my 40s when I tried to dabble
Yeah.
into some theater, but it's a lot of hard work.
No kidding. No
And
kidding.
that's like, do you have a feeling that psychology or counseling in particular is a
Mhm.
combination of art and science?
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
great question. I really do. In as
uh,
much as it's important that we are watching what the impact is. I mean, with art, I think that there's kind of an openness in terms of the impact that it might have, and it doesn't have this kind of self-corrective route. I think most artists aren't given the opportunity to interact with their audience in a way that allows them to sort of feed on it. Maybe that's not true. Maybe that's more true of performing artists. But even so, like with the lights in your face and you can't quite make out the audience, you have to kind of think more about being true to the piece of work that you plan to offer than being responsive to the audience. So the thing that for me is so cool about the artistry that's within psychology, within the practice of counseling or therapy, is that because it interfaces with science, for me, what that means is that we are using that feedback, that we're watching our impact, and we're allowing that to roll into the next iteration, the next intervention, the next word that we say, the next invitation that we offer, the next exercise, whatever it is. Whereas often with art, we don't get that opportunity. And that's
yeah,
probably
right.
overgeneralizing, but yeah.
Yeah. You just have to guess with the, audience giving you a standing ovation.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe it's
It's
just
not
peer
quite the
pressure.
same way.
Just kidding.
No, and it doesn't have the same like constant feedback. You don't have the same. And again, there's some the kinds of art that I like the best are the kind that allow for the interaction with the audience.
Oh, wow.
There's this great improv troupe in Chicago. My kid lives in Chicago, and when I go, we go and visit this improv troupe that's been around for ages. They're called the Neo Futurists,
Uh-huh.
and they write a number of plays, maybe 60 short little plays and sketches. And
Uh-huh.
they put up numbers, and the audience picks by number which one they're going to do by number and title. And they often have quite a bit of like audience interaction and participation. And not only that, but you get the sense that every time they do it, they've built in little things that make it special to that night, that make it unique to that particular iteration of the performance.
Uh,
So for me, yeah, I think there's some thin veils between art and science, and where they come together, where people are using the interaction, with
uh-huh.
their audience to inform their work, is probably my
Uh-huh.
favorite
All right.
bits.
Okay. All right. Oh, excellent, excellent. Okay. So, let me ask you, tell me about your act story. I mean, I came from training in psychodynamic therapy, and then I wasn't, yeah, it's kind of like I was happy with it, but it's kind of a lot of hard work.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
it didn't really register to me. I thought it was too deep. I
mhm,
can't
mhm, mhm.
I can't really
Yeah.
reach it. And then I turned into some CBT and then became an existential therapist, and now I saw some humanistic elements in ACT, and with I didn't realize that behaviorism would be. I thought it was the last thing I'd be interested in because I
Right.
thought I'm not a rat, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So uh, I thought behaviorists were all like hard scientists, very
Mhm,
cold-hearted
mhm,
scientists trying
mhm,
to
mhm.
manipulate their clients to do something by
Yeah.
reinforcement. Okay.
Sure.
So what drew
Yeah.
you to ACT, and what changed in your practice? I mean, were you originally in ABA, applied behavioral analysis, or what was your
Yeah.
original course?
So it's
Direction,
interesting.
sorry. Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
So really it's more like ACT is what confirmed my interest in psychology.
Ah.
So I started as probably a psych major, I'm pretty sure. And I waffled around a bit. I dabbled in pre-med for a minute.
Hmm.
I when as I was going through psychology, I found myself really challenged by the idea that the different courses, the different kind of subdisciplines within psychology didn't seem to overlap or talk to each other at all. And I kept waiting for there to be like a big class at the end that brought it all together, that made my social psychology class fit with my personality psychology class, fit with my learning class, fit with my cognitive class. And really what I was waiting for, I think, was some big theory, some big theory that allowed me to make sense of all of the different research and all of the different terms. And I really found that first in behaviorism as a theoretical perspective. Now, initially, I totally rejected it. Initially, I just was like, this seems like a bunch of smart people trying to reduce everything to like 10 principles. And the people that I was talking to who were behaviorists were like, yes, isn't it lovely?
So
And
sort of goes against your being artistic, right?
right? Yeah, yeah. That's exactly it. I felt like there was such nuance that was being lost, that everything was being sort of reduced and oversimplified, and
Yeah,
that
sure.
you couldn't do that in a way that something wouldn't be lost.
Yeah.
And so two things happen. And I had kind of two behavioral professors. One was Dr. David Greenway, and the other was Dr. Rick Perkins. Dr. Greenway knew that I was a single mom and gave me a job. So he hooked me up with at the time, it was a behavior analyst. Today, they would have been a BCBA, and they are today, but there wasn't that certification at the time. So it was a behavior analyst who was looking for people to work, directly with children to provide APA services. So he got me in the conversation by giving me a job, and Dr. Perkins actually handed me the ACT book. So he said, like, I hear what you're complaining about with behaviorism, but also this is behaviorism too. And he sort of slid the ACT book across the table, the 1999 Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, Hayes, Strassel, and Wilson.
Uh,
And two things happened like in really short proximity.
uh-huh.
One is, me reading the opening lines of the ACT book, like the single most incredible fact about human existence is how hard it is for humans to be happy.
Oh, yeah. All right.
That hit me in this kind of, and that's a paraphrase, it might not be exactly right, but it kind of hit me in this really, really kind of deep place. Like I mentioned, I was a single mom. It was just at the time that I received the book, it was right when 9/11 happened, September 11th, here in the United States. So there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger and a lot of division, and yeah, it was a hard time. I was in college. And simultaneously, I was working this job. So I'm raising this child who was quite verbal and quite vibrant and quite easy to connect with. And in the meanwhile, I was starting to do ABA with a kiddo that was not, very easy to connect with, that didn't have any language, whose all of his vitality was sort of in his interaction with himself and with his own activities. And our job was to open up the world for him, to give him a chance to figure out what's so lovely. And I say figure out, but to experience what's so lovely about walking outside, or what's nice about music, or what's nice about other humans, and to just broaden out his world. So that was the most gratifying work. And to even today, amongst some of the most gratifying work I've ever done. Was doing that ABA work just as a lowly line tech, and simultaneously reading this ACT book that kind of revealed for me and confirmed for me a lot of, I think, what I thought a lot about at the time in terms of how hard it is to be happy. So I kind of got behaviorism from two different angles. And my next piece of work was how to resolve them, right? Like how is it that this is the same field? I'm teaching this child to match colors, or to connect with other humans, to play games, to eat at a table. And over here, I'm reading about ways to sort of thrive with meaning and with purpose. So, when I decided to continue in graduate school, I decided that this was going to be my area, that I wanted to be in ACT. I wanted to be in behaviorism. I wanted to go somewhere for graduate training where I could do both. So that's what I did after some unsuccessful bids to get into grad school. It took me a couple of times. I then got into Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, and went to work with Dr. Kelly Wilson. And
oh, awesome.
Yeah, so I got to work with Kelly, and then simultaneously, at that same time, I was doing ABA in the school system. So I was being trained in ACT and still able to continue with my behavioral training at the same time. So for me, it's always been ACT. Psychology and ACT have always been kind of a kind, and dealt with or considered through that lens of behaviorism from the very beginning.
All right. Wow. That's a whole new topic for me. I really haven't gone into that. Combining ABA with ACT, I think that's awesome work that you're doing, but I'd have to read Skinner's book. He's hard to read.
He really is. He's not the easiest. I'll tell you how I kind of resolved them ultimately is like, it's not a different piece of work. Like what I was doing with this child, who was at the time the only client that I was working with, and then eventually with the kids in the school system, oftentimes with ADHD, diagnosed with autism, folks with typically that we would describe today as neurodivergent. I was helping them to open up their world. I was introducing them to new things and helping them to kind of orient to what was pleasurable or interesting or curious or exciting for them about that thing. There was a sort of nurturing of them being able to connect with it in a way that opened them up, that kept them kind of seeking and exploring and engaging. And the form looked very different. But but it was the same kind of spirit of the work that I learned to do in ACT. In ACT, we often
Yeah.
talk about it in terms of values, or valued
Uh,
living, but for me, it's really the same thing. I mean, I
mm,
want to bring into the room, into our conversation, things that are precious to my clients, both the
mm,
things that squeeze them down,
mm,
and also the things that delight them, or inspire them or make them curious. I think
yeah.
of that work also as opening up their worlds,
Yeah.
as helping them to develop the skill to go into any new situation, figure out what's pleasurable or important to them, orient to
Mm,
that, and engage in the behavior to kind of get closer to it, to relish it, to savor it, to navigate
yeah.
towards it.
Yeah.
um, for me, it's really the same piece of work, just looks different in two different
Yeah.
worlds.
I've read some stories. I read some of Stephen Hayes's book,
Mhm.
and he does mention some miracles that happened with, the kind of work that you do, from somebody who's like in his own world, like a child in his
Mhm.
or their own world, and all of a sudden one day they can speak like any other person. So I wish I had more expertise to ask you more about that,
Oh, no
but
worries.
I have other questions here. Hopefully, it's a little bit uh, uh, more about, let's say, our roles as psychologists in the
Mhm.
world.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, so, what do you see as our role in making a better world? I heard Stephen Hayes talk about things like, oh, why is it that we're never invited to forums where we talk about big issues around the world like climate change, even the COVID uh, epidemic. Eh, he said something like, "Why is there no psychologist there talking to people about because we're talking about behavior, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so why is it that you know there's a politician, there's the virologist, there's the economist, a business person, but we're I don't know. Are we not taken seriously when it comes to these issues?
Um,
I know. What is it?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of things that I think about. I mean, one
Mm,
is just even us casting it as an issue of behavior, that people need to behave differently, that a
yeah.
lot of the struggles on the planet are related to human behavior. You mentioned a
Yes.
few,
Yes.
and we could certainly mention some others. I'm not sure that most people see it like that. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that most people look at things, look at the issues around the world, and see it in terms of a problem with human behavior.
Uh-huh.
So whether it's kind of that what they believe about why those problems are in place, or whether it's just even how they cast it, how they think about it. So when I come into we just started a new semester, and I teach a class in behavior analysis for
Mm,
undergraduates. And
mm,
one of the things I tell them on the first day is that there is almost nothing that they would want to do with their lives that isn't about impacting other human behaviors. And they need some unpacking. They need to sort of stop and think, yeah, when I'm thinking about wanting to sell something, or when I'm thinking about wanting to make a cool website that people engage with, or when I'm thinking about wanting to be an educator and have people learn, or when I'm thinking about
uh-huh.
wanting to be an artist, that all of those are about impacting human behavior. So I think that's one challenge. I think some of the other challenges have to do with them misunderstanding what psychology is. That
Uh-huh.
psychology is
Uh-huh.
about writing stories about how we behave and why we behave the ways that we do. And we want those stories to allow us to then intervene effectively. I think
Uh-huh.
that most people do not think that is what psychology is. Most people think a lot more about a mind, or about emotional well-being, about things like self-care, which are all interesting and important stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, It's interesting because sometimes people with the most contextual perspective, which I would say I, as kind of a behaviorist,
Mm,
as an ACT therapist, I look at things contextually. I understand behavior in terms of the context in which it occurs. But oftentimes people with the most contextual perspective are the same ones, not inviting the psychologist to the table. There's an idea that comes up sometimes in like social justice circles that what
yeah.
psychologists would do would be to focus on the individual and miss the context. So in other
Uh,
words, we don't want to be serving people who are struggling with homelessness, with
uh,
houselessness,
uh,
and be working on their stress management,
uh,
and denying the idea that what they really need is a home. What they
yeah,
really need is a shelter.
yeah.
Going to people who are dealing with minority stress every day, that are being discriminated against or prejudiced
Mm-hmm,
against,
mm-hmm,
and sort of saying it's up to you to heal yourself and to develop a thicker skin or get more mindful with that ostracism or
mm,
prejudice, when there really are societal changes that need to happen. So,
yeah.
it's interesting because I think in the very places where perhaps we'd be most needed, I don't
Mm-hmm,
think that we've discovered the way to talk to people about their perspectives and our perspectives, and where those line up and where they
mm-hmm,
diverge. It's been hard for us to talk to people in a way that our analyses, that our kind of scholarly ways of looking at things, or our psychology perspective
mm-hmm,
resonates enough with them that it seems to have action implications that are really doable,
uh,
that they know what they would even do about psychology,
uh,
in the first place. How they bring that perspective to bear, I think isn't entirely clear.
mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah. Well, you know what? I did an interview recently because we here in the Philippines, it's pretty much accepted in society, uh, same-sex relationships,
Mhm,
uh, but legally they don't have the same rights, not like in the US. Here, there is no such thing as same-sex marriages, you know.
mhm, mhm,
So it's almost like we're still not there, but because we're copy of the American democratic system, you know.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I had that
mhm,
idea. I did that interview and I said I miss talking about this because I read Todd Rose. Have you heard about Todd Rose?
mhm.
The End of Average.
Okay.
When he said our system mostly because it has its roots in let's say we Stephen A's mentioned this quite often,
Mhm,
eugenics,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Some of the
mhm,
systems that we've inherited through the centuries. Uh, um, it's really about the individual fitting into the system,
mhm, mhm,
wherein we should be doing it the other way around. You know, the system should fit the individual. And I've seen some changes here in our country. We have certain places, very few places, where there's there is a, a mixed, let's say, gender neutral
mhm, mhm,
bathroom. All
mhm,
right.
mhm,
And some of these other things, like we have in our laws to help people with who are differently abled,
mhm,
like there's a requirement. So I don't know. Uh, in our country, one of the biggest issues is corruption. So I don't know if you think there's a context. Let's play a
mhm.
little game of context. What do you think would be a good context? Pick out a certain problem and what a society can do to change the context to help these individuals who are different, who we're
Yeah.
all different, right? And have allow them to live up to their full potential, not having the state
Yeah.
kind of limit them based on what's expected or what the rules
Mhm,
are, you know?
mhm. Yeah, I'm going to answer at two levels. I think you pointed to the great challenge is that we
Yeah.
keep looking all of us in some ways, depending on whether or not we're like policymakers or just,
Yeah.
parents or bosses,
Yes.
or we run a lab or a team. We keep looking for the average solution. I think we do it pretty naturally. We look for the
Yes.
line that we can draw through all of the variability that mostly meets the needs of most people, thinking that that average will mean that it meets the needs of most people. Oftentimes it ends up meeting the needs of no one.
Yes.
um,
Yes. Exactly.
and the folks that can sort of accommodate around it are the folks that have the most privilege to do so, that have been most empowered to do so, that have mostly had their needs met over time, or found it, easier to get those needs met.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a challenge. And I
Uh-huh.
think that one of the ways that we can respond to it as psychologists is to notice the places that we do the same. I mean, we could get into the room and try to inform policy, and I think the biggest thing that could happen with policy that would make a difference to me would be not just being science informed in terms of like looking at the literature and what works on the front end, but even just looking at how particular policies are actually functioning. If you make something illegal, does it happen less? I mean, in the US, when you make abortion illegal, it does not happen less. It actually
Mhm.
happens more, and it happens later
Yeah.
term, and more unsafe abortions occur. So that
Yes.
would be an idea of allowing the effects of the actual policy to inform policy changes from here on out. And there's just not good systems for that. But what I think that we can do as psychologists is find the
Yes.
places in our life right now
Mhm.
where we are trying to draw an average line, where we're
Yeah.
figure out what is going to fit for most people,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, as opposed to challenging ourselves to do the harder work, I think,
Yeah.
of getting to know each person that we affect,
Yeah.
and coming to let our interactions with them inform how it is that we impact their lives, or how it is that we interact with them.
Yeah.
An example might be, how I run a particular class. I mean, for a long time, I felt like what I had to do as a professor was to pick a
Mhm.
book and write my lectures, decide which chapter was going to go where, maybe add some supplementary videos or, articles, and lecture for a certain number of days, converse for a certain number of days, and then have a test, and then have, some more lecture, and then a test, and then some more lecture and a test. Um, Probably about 8 years, maybe 10 years ago or so, I started flipping my classroom and creating a big menu of activities. So in
Uh,
my behavior analysis class, there's about 1,800 points worth of potential activities. Some
uh,
of them involve lots of studying, like doing
mm,
fluency-based flashcards. Some of them involve interacting with other classmates. Some of them involve making content, like making videos, or some of them involve heavy applications. Some of them involve
yeah.
reading journal articles. And I create a big menu of those, and then students pick what
Oh,
they want.
wow.
So over time, and they have time restraints, right? Each unit, the assignments are only available during that time, but they can come to class for more points, or they can watch it on a recording for less points. They can read a journal article for more points, or they can just read the chapter and do discussion questions there. So, creating a menu and allowing my students to tell me, this is my plan, this is what works for me, and me making sure that I provide enough variability of activities that they can
Oh,
actually find what's going to work for them. And then their
wow.
grade isn't a percentage mastered. I'm not pretending like their grade is a percentage mastery. Their grade is both a reflection of what it is that they've chosen to do. And for me, it's a direct response to what they do. So they do a thing, they get the points. There's no averaging or weighting or anything like that. They do a thing, they get points. Tell them it's like a job, and their currency is points. And so they can skip a shift. They don't have to work this weekend. They could skip a whole week and not do any assignments. But then they wouldn't get any points for it, right? They can
Yeah.
always do more later, in the same way that you might take a week off of work, but then have a very heavy clinical load the next couple of weeks as you catch up a bit. So just an example, but wondering and challenging people to look around their world and think, where am I trying to offer an average instruction or an average invitation or an average lecture or whatever, and expecting that the audience will fall in line. And while it won't meet everybody's needs, a certain percentage's needs will be met and the rest
Yeah.
will have to fend for themselves. We don't have to do it that way.
That's amazing, Emily. I mean, sorry if I call you Emily. Hope you don't
Please.
mind.
Yeah, please, Nathan.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you should be part of our team at the Department of Education here. I mean, I'm so used to like going to a class, especially in the graduate level. It's just always a paper, a paper, a paper. It's always the same thing over and over. And, I'd love to be in your class. I
It's
guess.
fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
At the
I
grad level,
probably,
they just read a bunch of stuff and then bring discussion, and they just come and say, here's what I want us all to talk about this. So they'll say, I want
oh,
us all to
wow.
talk about elementary school classrooms in the US and how they work. I want us all to talk about the contingencies around racial oppression. I want us all to talk today about marketing and grifting and where the
Yeah.
problems are, all from
Yeah.
this kind of contextual perspective. It's fun.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well,
It's sort of like the big question, Nathan, would be like,
uh,
instead of trying to picture like the perfect kind of rules or instructions to give people for them
yeah.
to have the experience that we want or engage in the
Yeah.
behavior that we want,
Yeah.
what if instead we tried to make it, as I'm going to use the word appetitive, as engaging and informing
Yeah.
and kind of connecting as possible,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then let
Hmm.
it get shaped in
Yeah.
the person's interaction with it.
I'm always sad when I see clients who have a different kind of lifestyle. And here in our country, I think 80% of us are Catholic, you
Uh-huh.
know. So we have a family code that the family should have this and this, sort of a
Mhm.
real
Mhm.
structure behind the family, you know. So otherwise, maybe it's not too healthy, So
Yeah.
it's a sad thing. My heart bleeds when I see clients like that, and they have a
Mhm.
very, let's say, we don't even have divorce here. We're the only country besides the Vatican that doesn't have a law for divorce.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so thank you. I mean, I wish we could have more professors like you here. Anyway,
Oh,
the
thank
time
you.
goes really, really fast. I think we only have 20 minutes left.
There we go.
I have
Yeah,
I have a very interesting question for you.
please.
Uh, uh, Stephen Hayes ended one of his books. It's called Liberated Mind. You know about that book probably.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he ended it with something like love is not everything, it's the only thing. All right.
Mhm. Mhm.
So whatever I did in my life, I always felt like all these cliches about love is all that matters, love
Mhm.
is the
Mhm.
answer, we hear it all
Mhm.
around. So what does it play in your work? I mean, is there something about love in our work? Is there,
Yeah.
is that what undergirds? Do you agree with Stephen Hayes that the six flexibility skills are wrapped up in
Mhm.
three and then wrapped up in one word, f-
Mhm.
which is
Yeah.
love? Yeah.
It's certainly how I think about my work.
Mm,
Let's take the example of therapy, which is a
mm,
big part of what I do. And my understanding, it's just what we were just talking about, but applied in a smaller scale. I could have the client come in and I could try to figure out in general what the perfect thing is to say to a client, what the best way to start sessions are,
Mm-hmm.
how I typically work. I could
Mm-hmm.
try to figure out the kind of perfect way that would fit for most clients and really try to just adapt from there.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I think for me, I use the metaphor sometimes of pottery. For me, working with a client, maybe getting a new client is sort of like a big lump of clay, set before me. And
Mm-hmm.
there's tons of variability between different chunks of clay, the
Mm-hmm.
minerals, how finely they're ground,
Mm-hmm.
how moist, how much moisture is in them. But that's not the only thing that matters in terms of its responsiveness. There's also things like my body temperature, how
Mm-hmm.
moist my hands are,
Mm-hmm.
how much dexterity I have that morning. If I'm working on a table, how strong my legs are, how fast I'm able to spin the table.
Mm-hmm.
There's all this variability in me and in that piece of clay. And I
Mm-hmm.
could try to sort of figure it all out in my head and say, I always start like this, or it's best to start like this for every piece of clay. The other thing that I could do is just put my hands on the clay and start working it. The other thing that I could do with a client is I could just begin interacting and allow my interactions with the client to shape me into the therapist that they need.
Mm-hmm.
I can invite them to show me their hardest moments. I can invite them to try new things right here in the moment with me. I can catch them, when I ask them to try a thing that's too hard and they fall or they falter. I can offer soothing when they're being brave, but they just don't have it to push all the way. We can gradually together nurture this relationship,
Mm-hmm.
co-create this relationship. Sometimes me as the potter and them as the clay, and
Mm-hmm.
really simultaneously them as the potter and me as the clay. Gradually sort of moving the relationship in a way that allows them to interact with their life at large in a really different way, in a way that's more satisfying to them, more meaningful, more inspiring. And if that's not love, then I don't really know what love is, right? Like
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
responsive, being curious, letting
Yeah.
a person shape you, letting them grow you into what they need, together nurturing a relationship.
Yeah.
I think about my classes the same way. I think
Uh,
about parenting the same way. Like
mm-hmm.
if I'm not allowing my interactions with something to grow me, then I'm really not loving it.
Yeah.
I'm really not loving it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I also heard a philosopher say that about their work.
Mm,
Philosophies at bottom is also about love, so
mhm,
we might sound like, geeky people, but really down under, it's really that wanting
mhm.
a change for the better,
I think so.
so
Yeah, I think so.
anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't know, we only have about 5 minutes before the end of the hour. uh one last question. What's your vision for psychology? uh what do you
Hmm.
think needs to change in the way we do psychology today? I've always been, yeah, well, I read, uh, some of the things, the averagarianism,
Mhm, mhm,
I got all that information from one book so far because it's not really related to what I do, but that's all I have, and one thing I want is someday, credentialing people, like not really having to go through one, like a whole degree program that takes you 4 years to train a psychologist. In fact,
mhm,
I heard Stephen Hayes that we should be giving this away. It's not
mhm,
supposed to
mhm,
be something that's exclusive to a few, esoteric, like an esoteric group, Uh, so it's a wonderful vision. And I, Tadro said in his book, you don't need a time frame to get a driver's license. You can always You
Mhm.
can take the
Mhm.
test as many times as you want until you can drive. It's not like there's a set number of years or set number of weeks that you have to learn how to drive, and then you don't have a chance anymore. So that's my vision for psychology, or even the way
Mhm.
we educate people. He calls it credentialing, and it's possible now because of the technology we have. He
Mhm.
cites, for example, the Khan Academy, where you can
Mhm.
pick courses. It would be such a utopia for me if you go into college or high school and you can just pick whatever course you want and study whatever you want. You know, uh, you can't really absorb you have too much to study up to that level. I think they do it in some countries in like Finland. I think since education is free, people can just take any course they want. That's
Mhm. Mhm.
uh more to their interest, and which goes back to how you teach your class.
Yeah,
So
for
all right,
sure.
yeah,
It's interesting, yeah. So I mean, I love that vision, the idea that people could sort of cultivate the training experiences and kind of curate the training experience that they are interested in and that best fits their needs or the needs of their communities or
yeah.
whatever industry they want to work in. Um, for me, I think I would really like there to be more mechanisms for us to give this away. Like, I think that we need to get better at talking about our work without people having to know what the terms mean. We
Mm-hmm.
need to get better at connecting
Mm-hmm.
with people around that. And I think it has two parts. One, maybe dropping some of the jargon and being able to talk normally with folks that don't have the vocabulary, that's specific to our discipline, whatever that happens to be. But the
Yeah,
second thing is listening. I think that we
yeah.
need to get better at listening and respecting the lived experiences of folks. I mean, we do that in the therapy room, but oftentimes we don't take that same wisdom that it's important to listen before we try to make changes. We don't take that same practice out into the world. If
Mm-hmm.
if I want to impact the unhoused in my community,
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be a good idea to listen to some of them, to ask
Mm-hmm.
some of them what is important to them and what might motivate them or inspire them. If I want to improve the experience of graduate students at my university,
Mm-hmm.
I should probably ask them how their lives are,
Uh,
what's working for them and what's not working for them. I think sometimes we get so enamored of our own expertise that we
mm-hmm.
forget, that the
Mm-hmm.
humans that are whose behavior we're wanting to impact, that they are individuals and that they have a kind of expertise that is different from ours. That
Yeah.
isn't the sum total of lots of other smart people thinking about this and lots of other educated people thinking about this, but is the sum total of their experience and all of those little sort of perspectives, diverse perspectives brought together, bring a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of wisdom. And so I think we could all do maybe what I'm saying is that my vision for psychology is one that is more connected and humble.
Uh, yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I hope my title for this series is humble enough. Two shrinks over drinks.
Yeah, that'll work. Thank you so much for having me, Nathan. I really appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff.
All right. Thank you. And it's a privilege, and I'm so humbled by people like you who have accomplished so much and willing to talk to a small channel like me and counselor here in the Philippines. So I
No,
appreciate it.
anytime. Thanks.
All right. Okay.